How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Ayin Aleph, Daf 71 of Masechta Zevachim. Friends, Daf Ayin Aleph, Daf 71. Okay, we begin the 8th parak of Masechta Zevachim, which is Gevaldik. That means that we are more than halfway through the Masechta, not just in pages, but in chapters as well, which is great. Daf Ayin Aleph. Okay, so the 8th parak of Masechta Zevachim. So we're basically going to be learning a Mishnah and a little bit of Gemara. It's not such a big page, so I imagine it shouldn't take us too long. But it's not the easiest subject matter. It's talking about animals that get all mixed up with each other. And what do you do when korbanos get mixed up with non-korbanos, isur no, things like that? How do you remedy, if at all? That's kind of the topic of today's daf. Animals getting mixed up with each other, and what do you do about it? So let's jump in. Friends, we're going to begin on Daf Ayin Omid Beis, 3 lines from the bottom at the Mishnah, at the new parak. Kol hazvachim shenisarvu b'chatos hamesos o b'shor haniska afilu echad b'ribo yamusu kulan. Okay. So it sounds like, what the Gemara is going to talk about what exactly it means, but it sounds like what the Mishnah is saying is, again, Kol hazvachim shenisarvu b'chatos hamesos. So, chatos hamesos, there are 5 chatos hamesos. I tried to see if I could remember them yesterday, but I couldn't remember all of them. But like one example, for example, is chatas shemesu ba'aleh. Right? If Reuben is bringing a korban chatas, he sets aside a kisba to be his korban chatas, and then he drops dead. So that's one example of a chatos hames. A chatas that you basically just need to let it die. Now, so what if you have chatos hamesos? So it sounds like it's plural over here. In my mind, it's easier if I just think of one. So let's say you have a korban shlomim, okay, and your korban shlomim is a kispa. You set aside a kispa to be your korban shlomim, and then it gets mixed up with a chatas hames, a chatas that's also bano, a chatas that you can't offer as a korban. So, you can't tell which one is which, right? You don't know which one's yours, which one's the chatos hames. You're basically stuck. So it says, so korbanos that get mixed up with chatos hames. Now, I imagine, it also depends, as we're going to see at the end of the Mishnah. Kilu, if you're talking about a korban ola that gets mixed up with a chatos hamesos, I mean, chances are, unless we're talking about like the sayur nasi or something, right? Because a korban ola is male. A chatas, a regular korban chatas, is female, so you should probably be able to tell the difference there. But, anyways, in the event that you can't tell the difference, so o b'shor haniskol, or with the shor haniskol, so assuming that we're talking about cows over here, so afilu ech achas b'ribo yamusu, even if you get mixed up with 1,000 of them, they all have to die. Now, the Gemara is going to ask, meaning, let's say you have 1,000 chatos hamesos, and then your korban gets mixed in. Even if there's 1,000, they all have to die. Well, they all have to die anyways. Ki'ilu, they're chatos hamesos. So, anyways, the Gemara is going to discuss that. But anyways, you have your korban, your animal that's been set aside as a korban, gets mixed up with a bunch of animals that are asur ba'ano. They all basically have to, all animals shor niskol also needs to be stoned, and these chatos hamesos you have to let die, and your animal gets mixed up in that crowd, so they all have to die. Nisarvu b'shor shenevda ba'aver. So now, in this scenario, what happens is your animal gets mixed up with animals that are asur to be offered as korbanis, but they're mutter lahedjit. Right? They aren't asur ba'ano, but you can't bring them as korbanos. For example, right? So we're nisar b'shor shenev ba'aver. So if I guess we must obviously be talking about a cow that was set aside as a korban, gets mixed up with a ox, meaning your ox gets mixed up with an ox, shenev ba'aver, that avera was done with it. For example, shehemis esa odom al pi echad. For example, it killed somebody, but there was only one witness. So we're not going to kill it because you would need 2 witnesses for that. But we're also not going to offer it as a korban. But it's also mutter ba'ano. Or al pi abaylim, or if the owner had said, moda b'knas potter, right? So if the owner had come and said, look, my shore killed somebody, so we're not going to kill the animal, but you can't offer it as a korban, b'raveh v'nirva, or if you have one witness to testify that this ox, or right, I guess we're talking about shor shnev b'raveh, so let's assume that we're talking about an ox, then that was roveh, a woman, or was nirva by a man. B'muktzeh, or an ox that was set aside for to be used for avodah zarah, v'nevad, or worship as avodah zarah, which we know from Masechta avodah zarah would be asur legavo, but mutar lehedjit. I think mutar lehedjit, right? I believe so. Be'esnon, or if it was used as payment for a harlot services, u'mechir, or it was used as payment for a hund, for a dog, bekilayim, or if we're talking about an animal that was kilayim. I don't really understand this one so much. Maybe it's here for some other reasons, but if it gets mixed up with an animal that is a hybrid of other animals, I mean, imagine we're not talking about a mule over here, because mules wouldn't be offered as korbanos. Maybe some kind of like shot kind of a thing, or a geep, maybe like a shot or a geep or something. But again, I mean, wouldn't you be able to tell which one is your sheep and which one is the shot? I don't know. Uvitreifa, a treifa of Yotzidofen, a animal that was like a C-section kind of animal. In any of these events, these are animals that are not osur bano. They're mutar bano. You can eat them. So what you do is, so basically what happens is, so let's use one example. Let's say mechir kelev. Okay, so you have your animal, right? You have your sheep. Your sheep was set aside as a korban shlamim. Now all of a sudden you find two sheep, and one of them is yours. The other one is a sheep that was used as payment for a dog. You don't know which one is which. You don't know which one is yours, which one is the dog payment, which is the mechir kelev. Your animal is meant to be a korban. The mechir kelev is also the gavoa, cannot be offered as a korban. So what do? You can't offer them both, because one of them is mechir kelev. You can't just choose one at random. Maybe it's mechir kelev one. What do you do? So there's an answer. Achi Yistoavu, as we've seen before, there's like a little bit of a tricky concept. For some reason, every time this comes up, this always feels like a little bit tricky even though I get how it works, but I'll tell you why, because there's a lot of steps. That's why. Because there's a lot of steps. That's why. So Achi Yistoavu, V'imachru, V'avi b'dmei, Hayafa shaboen me'osamin. So basically what you do is, you take the two animals and you let them graze. You give them to a shepherd, you let them graze. Then when both of them get mums, well then, if they both have mums, neither of them could be offered as korbanos. They're both mutar bano, but they can't be offered as korbanos. So since they can't be offered as korbanos, you sell them both. Somebody buys the two animals. So now you have the payment for both of the animals. Let's say one of them you got paid $100 for them, the other one you got paid $125 for them, right? So the person who buys them can slaughter them, can eat them, and now you have this money that you received for the two animals. So one of those animals was your korban. So you have to assume that the more expensive one was your korban, and so if you received $100 for one of them, $125 for the other one. So for the $125, you buy a new korban, a new animal. And then you offer that as a korban. You buy a new animal and you offer that as your korban shalom. Now you can't do that, with chatos amesos, for example, because those are also bano. You just got to let them die. You can't sell them to somebody to eat. But in this case, you can, since they both had mums. But they're not also bano or anything like that. But they both got mums. They can't be offered as korbanos. They can be eaten. So sell them to somebody and they'll eat them and take the money, the more expensive price. You will invest in a new animal, and that animal you will offer as a korban. I wonder how common is it for? Should we ask ChatGPT? Let's see if we can find out. ChatGPT, how common is it for an animal like a sheep to get blemished? I don't even know. It's a very generic word, blemish. But if by blemished you mean any physical defect, injury, scar, or abnormality on the body, such as cuts, wool, defects, okay, then it is actually quite common for sheep to develop blemishes. Okay. So wool blemishes are very common. Skin blemishes, fairly common. Hoof or leg blemishes, common. Minor limping or hoof chips, swelling. Interesting. Okay. Conformation, permanent but not rare. But okay. Underbites, ear notches. I feel like, oh, so, yeah. I feel like, right, those are the kinds of things. Okay. So if we classify any visible defects as minor blemishes, okay, extremely common, seen in most flocks, moderate, common but usually manageable, severe, less common, often related to disease or injury. 10 to 40% of sheep, it is normal for 10 to 40% of sheep to show some kind of minor blemishes at any given time, depending on Okay. Okay, so it could be just a quick kind of survey from ChatGPT. It could be that getting a mum isn't that uncommon, I get it, right? Because it comes up in the Gemara all the time. Just let it graze until it gets a mum. Like, I don't know, like how common is it? Probably like to lose a leg is probably less common, but there's all sorts of mums. Eye defects. I think ear defects are also. Anyways, okay. So you let them get mums and then you sell them, and the more expensive price will be paid to buy a new animal. Okay. Nis'arvu b'chulin tamimim yimachu achulin l'tzarkei also amin. Okay. So let's say you have your animal, your sheep. Okay, your sheep is going to be brought as a korban shlamim. Great. But now, so in the previous example, you find, it got mixed up with a mechir kelev, which is also to be offered as a korban. In this case, it gets mixed together with just another sheep. And you're like, oh, dang it. There's now two of these sheep, so I don't know which one is mine. They're both chulin. The thing is, one of them has been set aside to be a korban. The other one is just chulin. You can slaughter and eat it. So what do? Well, you can't just choose one of them because maybe it's the chulin one. So what you do is you say to your friend, hey friend, there's two animals over here. One of them is an animal that I've set aside to be a korban shlamim. The other one is chulin. How about this, friend? Do you want to come with me to the Beis HaMikdash and we'll both bring korban shlamims? We'll spend the day at the Beis HaMikdash. We'll have a barbecue. We'll have two sheep. It'll be mamish. It'll be amazing. Get some nice wine. That sounds like an incredible afternoon at the Beis HaMikdash. Sounds great. A very nice afternoon. Korban shlamim. Anyway, he says, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do it. Let's go bring korban shlamims. He says, great. So they go to the Beis HaMikdash and they say, hey, we've got two sheep over here. We're two people. And, we don't know which sheep is whose, but they said to the korban, look, just offer the both as korbanis and say that you're offering it for whoever the owner is, right? And then memela, the sheep that was set aside for Ruvain, let's call them Ruvain and Shimon, the sheep that was set aside for Ruvain will count for Ruvain, and the sheep that was set aside for Shimon will count for Shimon. Givalded. So basically, right, so what do we say? So Nasar b'chulin, so if Ruvain's sheep gets mixed together with a chulin sheep, tmimim, and they're both healthy, so yimachu achulin, the tzarkei also amin. So Reuven says to Shimon, do you want to buy this sheep from me? And Shimon will pay him for it, whatever, and then now the sheep belongs to Shimon as his korban, and they'll bring both of the animals as korbanis to the Beis HaMikdash. Kodshim b'kodshim, okay, what if Reuven's animal that he set aside to be a korban shlamim gets mixed together with Shimon's korban shlamim? And again, we don't know whose is whose. Min b'mino, so if they're both the same, they're both korban shlamim, zeh yikar v'shem mi shehu, v'zeh yikar v'shem mi shehu. So just like in the previous case, you'll bring them both to the Beis HaMikdash. Reuven, right? So Reuven's sheep got mixed together with Shimon's sheep, and they're both shlamim. So again, you go to the Beis HaMikdash, say to the kohen, look, we got these two animals here. We're not sure whose is whose, but just offer them for whoever's it is. Right? So the kohen offers it and says, this sheep is for whoever its rightful owner is. Now what happens though if Reuven's female sheep gets mixed together with another female sheep, but that female sheep is a korban chatas? So that's going to be tricky because chatas and shlamim are different, have all sorts of different halachas. So now what do you do? So you, achistoavu v'yimachu v'yavi b'dmei ayafa shabayin mimin zeh u'v'dmei ayafa shabayin mimin zeh v'yafsid moser mi beso. So in this case, what you do is, so we have these two female sheep. We're not sure which one is the chatos, which one is the shlomim. Shlomim, of course, could be offered from male, female, it doesn't matter. Chatos have to dafka be kisba v'seira, right? Either a female sheep or a female goat. A shlomim could be female, male, whatever. So if Reuven had set aside a female sheep, let's say, for his korban shlomim, and it gets mixed together with a female sheep that was set aside as a chatos, so again, we can't just offer both of them because we don't know which one is the shlomim, which one is the chatos. So what you do is, again, you let them graze until they get a mum, and then once they get a mum, they can't be offered as korbanos anymore, so you could sell them to somebody to eat. You'll take the money that you get. Let's say one of them you got $100 for, the other one you got $125 for. Well, you don't. So you basically have to spend $125 on two new animals, $125 each, because you don't know which one was yours. So then you buy two new animals, $125 each, and the extra $25 they'll have to come up with on their own. And you buy two new korbanos, a shlamim and a chatas, and you offer those new korbanos, right? So Reuven will offer his sheep as his shlamim, and Shimon will offer his as his chatas. Nisa'arvu b'bechor u'v'maiser. Okay, so this case is talking about. Okay, so the interesting thing about bechor and maiser, right, is that, for example, a bechor, right, if your sheep, if an ewe gives birth to a firstborn male sheep, so that sheep is given to the kohen, and the kohen brings it as a korban bechor, basically a kind of shlamim. But if that bechor gets a mum, so the kohen just eats it, right? It's not the kind of thing where you sell it and then it's money, you bring a new korban. No, you just eat it. You get some mum, you can just slaughter and eat it. So now, what happens if, let's say, a korban shlamim gets mixed together with a bechor? So now what do? You're not sure which one is the shlamim, which one is the bechor. Because bechor, right? Bechor is, for example, it's matana achas, where shlamim shtei matana shen achas, shen echad, shtei matana shen arba, right? There's different halachas between a bechor and a shlamim. So if you have, let's say, a shlamim that gets mixed together with a bechor, so now, so what do? So you wait until they both get mums. Okay, so they both have mums. Now one of them is bechor. The bechor could just be eaten right now. The shlamim can't be eaten, but what you do is you can redeem the value of the more expensive of the two onto money. And now what you're left is you have the money that's kadosh, and you buy a new animal with that money, and that'll be your shlamim, and you'll offer that shlamim. And what you're left with, those two animals, they're both chulin, right? Well, meaning the bechor, well, they're not both chulin, but the bechor you can eat because it has a blemish. The other animal is now chulin because you redeemed it. And now you can basically now eat both of them. But you have to eat both of them with the stringency of a bechor, since you're not sure which one is the bechor. Or meiser. Hakol yicholin l'sarif chutz min achadis ve'oshim, and all of the different korbanos, all of the different animals can get mixed, could potentially get mixed together with each other and wouldn't know which is which. For example, you can have a chatas and a shlam get mixed together if they're both female, and we won't know which is which. But a Osham and a chatas that get mixed together, we will be able to tell which is which, because an Osham has to be a boy and a chatas has to be a girl, and therefore there would be no scenario where an Osham has to be a ram and a chatas is kispa v'seira, and we would basically be able to tell which one is the chatas and which one is the Osham. Now, says the Gemara, my afilu. What's the deal with afilu, right? As I pointed out in the Mishnah, kilu, if you have one shlamim that gets mixed together with a whole bunch of chatos or mesos, even if there's 1,000 chatos or mesos, they all have to die. What do you mean? Yeah, I know. If you have one chatos or mesos, it has to die. If you have 1,000 chatos or mesos, they all have to die. Like, what's the big chiddush? So rather, it's saying fakir. Hachikam, this is what it's saying. Kol hazvachim shenis arvu boyin chatos amesos oshor nisko afilu echad bribo yimusukula. No, if you have a whole bunch of shlamim, let's say, and a 1 and 1 shor nisko or 1 chatos ames gets mixed together, even with 1,000 korban shlamim, they all have to die because we don't know which one is the one that is asur bano, and there's nothing to do about it, and therefore they all have to die. Tanina chadazim, in fact, but don't we already know this from a Mishnah in Tamura? Kol ha'asurin legab mizbeach, all korbanis, all animals that are asur for the mizbeach, osrin b'chol shein, they will make a whole mixture of animals asur even in any amount. Haraveya v'nirva, and starts giving examples. For example, Raveya and Nirva. So Amar Rav Ashi Amrisa the Shmai of Shimi says of Ashi, I said this before of Shimi, the Atzrichon, and we concluded that we need both Mishnayos, Zevachim and Tamura. Di me'asim, because if we only add the Mishnah in Tamura, I would say, look, Hava Amina anemile ligavoa. All of the examples in Tamura are animals that are asur to bring as korbanis, but they are mutter lehedjit. They are mutter bahano'ah. Aval lehedjit, however, in Zvachim, we're talking about animals that are even asur lehedjit. They're even asur bahano'ah. Chataos amesos, shor aniskol. Therefore, and in this case, we're going to have to mamish, right? So because these are animals that are asur ba'ano, and there's basically no remedy, we're going to have to kill all of them. So ema lo, I'll say that maybe let's try to figure out some kind of remedy in this scenario, right? In the case of Tamura, those are things that are mutter lehedjot, they're mutter ba'ano, you can let them graze, get mums, there's things you could do about it. Over here, they all have to die. So maybe in the case of Zvachim, I would think that let's try to come up with some kind of solution so we don't have to kill all of them. So therefore I need the Mishnah in Zvachim as well to teach that no, in this case they all have to pashit die. And if we would only have the case in Zvachim, havamina hane who the Assyria no, I would make the opposite argument. If I only had this case in Zvachim, I would say, okay, fine, that's because these are also ba'ano, they're very stringent. That's why that's why the mixture that's why they're not bottle and everything needs to die. Aval hane, but in the case of Tamura, where we're talking about animals that are mutter ba'ana, I'm going to read it with the Agos Sabach, de lavi sorena ninu, that they're not also ba'ana, emalo, I will say that maybe we could say that they're bottle. They're less stringent, maybe they could be bottled. Tzriche, therefore we need both cases. The case of Zvachim, which is talking about animals that are also ba'ana, and the case of Tamura, that is talking about animals that are mutter ba'ana. But the lav isorena ninu hatanale. But one second, here in Zvachim, we don't only talk about Shor Niskol and Chatos HaMesos. The Mishnah goes on, and it says, Rovea, Nirva, Mukta, Nevad, etc., things that are Asur Legavoa, but Mutter Lehedjit. So Gemara answers, Mikatani, so here actually we'll read the parentheses with a little bit of amendments. Mikatani, Bicholshu, Hosam Katani. That, yes, but in Tamura, it mentions Osin Bikolshu. That they give an amount, that it says over there that any amount is going to make the mixture possible. It doesn't say any amount over, it doesn't say a kolshu over here. I might think that over here it could be bottle, 1 in 200, 1 in 100. So therefore over there it says kolshu to say that any amount is going to make the mixture possible. So why not only have the Mishnah in Tamura and we don't need the Mishnah here in Zvachim? Takanta it's trichale. Well, over here in the Mishnah in Zvachim, it gives solutions here. You let them graze, and then once they get a mum, and then you could sell them. So here it has the solutions. So we need Zvachim. We need the Mishnah in Zvachim with the solutions to hedge it. Nami tanale. Okay, but even these examples in Zvachim where they're asur even ba'ana, even to ejotis, like Shor Niskol and Chatos HaMesos, we have things that are asur ba'ana we already have that in Masechta Avodah Zarah. Ve'elu asurin ve'osim b'chol shein. These things are forbidden and they are asur with any amount. Yein nesech avodas kuchavim. These are things that are asur even ba'ana. So tzricha, we need both the case in Zvachim as well as the case in Avodah Zarah. And these next few lines, we're going to be like making girsa changes. Dime also, if we'd only have the case in Avodah Zarah, Hava Amina, I would think lichulin. That's talking about over there. We're talking about. I'm reading with the Agos V'Tzunim. Hanami lichulin. That is chulin, right? Yenesech Avodah Zarah, Hava Kodshim Ema Lo Nafsidinu. But by Kodshim, in our case, Korbanis, I would think that maybe let's try to come up with a solution that we don't need to just let them all die. And if we only have here in Zvachim Hava Amina Hanemile Ligavoa, here I would say that is because we're talking about Korbanis Dimais. We don't want to bring a korban that is mixed together with that was mixed together with Katos Amesos, Shoranisko, Haval Chulin. If we're talking about Chulin Dilomais, where it's not like it's being offered for a korban or something like that. So Ema Isuri Ano Libatle Beruba. I'll say that over there, even though it's also by no, it can be batal barov, by yenesech, by avodah zarah. So therefore, we need both cases to say that in both cases they are not batal barov. That was Daf Ayin Aleph of Masechta Zvachim. On Daf Ayin Aleph of Masechta Zvachim, we began the 8th parak of Masechta Zvachim that talked about all sorts of animals and korbanos that are getting mixed together with all sorts of other korbanos and what happens and different solutions. In some cases, they all have to die. In other cases, you can let them graze. They get a mum, sell them, buy a new korban. So we kind of went through all those kinds of scenarios, compared them to Mishnayos in Timura, Mishnayos in Avodah Zarah, and kind of remedied them. That's what we had on Daf Ayin Aleph of Masechta Zvachim. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.